Today we're going to be discussing the origins of the British Empire, looking in particular at the rise of English power within the British Isles. Before we do that, though, we should trace the evolution of a key term: empire. When medieval Britons considered the term empire, they didn't think of themselves. They thought of the Holy Roman Empire, which was literally just referred to as the Empire. It was the most powerful state in Europe at the time, ruling over what is now Germany, Austria, northern Italy, and briefly included Spain and its possessions in the Americas. Empire derived from the Latin word imperium, which meant something along the lines of absolute sovereignty. If you possessed imperium, nobody could appeal to any authority above you. The Holy Roman Emperor fought wars and had enemies just like every other king in Europe, but he also set out what most closely approximated international law during the 15th and 16th centuries. Laws on how to treat civilians, on how to wage war, and so on. This was even reflected in the clothes they wore. Ever wonder why medieval crowns looked like this? Here's a portrait of Edward the Longshanks, who was king during the 13th century, for those of you not familiar with Braveheart. He's wearing what was called a single crown, which meant that he was king, but not emperor. Elizabeth II, portrayed here to the right, is wearing a double crown. During the Middle Ages, only the Holy Roman Emperor could wear a crown that looked like that. These regulations were set by the Pope, who wore an even bigger crown. Here's a portrait of the Pope Clement VIII wearing the papal tiara, or triple crown, emphasizing papal sovereignty over all temporal rulers, the Holy Roman Emperor and the other kings of Europe. This was a nice and tidy system, but then along came this man, Martin Luther. Luther launched the Protestant Reformation, and as you can imagine, princes who were attracted to the new religion were not interested in following a system governed by the Pope, especially since the Holy Roman Emperor at the time, Charles V, remained Catholic. Henry VIII, who broke with Rome over the Pope's unwillingness to grant his divorce with Catherine of Aragon, no longer felt the need to bow to the Holy Roman Emperor or wear a lesser crown. In 1533, he passed an act through Parliament entitled the Act in Restraint of Appeals, which specifically set out that England was fully its own kingdom. It possessed Imperium and was therefore an empire. The Reformation had more than this effect on English expansion, though. Its significance rested on a lot more than simple wordplay. It added a religious dimension to geopolitical conflict, as Protestant England fought Catholic France and Catholic Spain, and also squared off against Catholic lords in Ireland and Catholic clans in Scotland, national security under a religious guise. English expansion, though, certainly predated these religious chasms of the 16th century. We've already discussed the fact that England was weak when compared with Mughal India, and it certainly was, but England's relative weakness abroad was set against its relative strength at home. After all, we're talking about the British Isles, not any other name. Even nationalist historians in Ireland will call the Isles the British Isles. Here's a graph depicting differences in population among the constituent countries, Scotland, England, Wales, and Ireland, with the numbers for Ireland's population, including people living in the northern 6 counties, which remained part of the United Kingdom after Irish independence in 1922. Similar disparities exist if we turn back the clock, with this second graph revealing the differing population statistics as of 1600. Looking at these figures, if one of the other states wanted to dominate any of the other 3, you can probably guess which one would succeed in doing so. English kings have asserted their primacy over the other constituent countries of the British Isles for quite a long time. Anglo-Saxon monarchs claimed overlordship over Scotland as early as the 10th century, While William the Conqueror, the Norman baron who seized the throne of England after the Battle of Hastings in 1066, made the Scottish King Malcolm III swear fealty to him in 1070, arranging a meeting where Malcolm III bowed to him as the overlord of all Britain. Have any of you read Macbeth? Remember that it was an English army that arrives to attack Macbeth and support his rival. This was certainly English imperialism at work, even if Shakespeare doesn't necessarily portray it as such. At first, though, these claims to overlordship don't matter all that much in practical terms. English kings have no real authority over the kings of Scotland or the princes in Wales, or over any of the many kings who rule parts of Ireland. But in the late 13th century, one English king tried to change that. This king was Edward I, or Edward the Longshanks, who ruled from the 1270s all the way up to 1307. Longshanks got the nickname he has because he had long shanks or legs. As far as royal nicknames go, this isn't necessarily a bad one. It's not as good as Alfred the Great, who defeated the Vikings in the 9th century, but it's definitely better than Ethelred the Unready, who also fought Vikings, but was not very ready for them and lost. Edward the Longshanks fought wars with France, and he worried that the French would seek to ally with Wales or Scotland. The best way to avoid this predicament was to conquer them, thus uniting all of Great Britain under one ruler, though Longshanks was helped along by events in both countries. He took advantage of factional infighting among Welsh lords to divide and conquer. He defeated the Welsh prince Llewellyn ap Gruffydd, or Llewellyn the Last, and sought to cement English rule by constructing a series of castles through the Welsh countryside. Wales would be formally incorporated into the English crown, and Welsh representatives would sit in the English Parliament in London. Things were a bit more difficult in Scotland, north of the border, but here too events provided an opportunity. In 1286, the Scottish King Alexander III suddenly died. He was riding his horse along the cliffs on the northeastern coast of the country and fell off. There were rumors of foul play then and later, and there are some Scottish nationalists that whispered that Longshanks may have had a hand in it. There's no evidence for this at all. He was riding on a stormy night, and his horse probably tripped. Still, his sudden death was a disaster for Scotland. Alexander III's sons had died, leaving only an infant daughter behind, his daughter Margaret, who had been betrothed to the Norwegian royal line and actually had to travel from Norway to Scotland to take her crown. She doesn't live very long. Once she dies, Scotland was without a monarch, and it was at this point that Longshanks steps in. He offers to appoint a king and back him with English money and troops if necessary, but in return requires that king to do his bidding in Scotland and pledge to support him in any wars against France. Longshanks settles upon John Balliol as this candidate, who, as it turns out, was not actually as amenable to these terms as Edward would have wished. Balliol thought that he could just swear fealty and return home, like any of the other Scottish kings had done before him. But this wasn't going to work with Longshanks, and by 1297 he had kicked Balliol off the throne and declared himself King of Scotland. That didn't sit very well with this man. William Wallace never looked like this. Statues and paintings in Scotland have him looking like the knight that he actually was. Wallace was a commoner who owned his own lands, no lord certainly, but also no peasant. He rose up in favor of John Balliol, who he believed was the rightful king of Scotland. He defeated the English at the Battle of Stirling Bridge, but lost the Battle of Falkirk a few months later, at which point he carried on a guerrilla struggle for a few more years before finally getting captured and executed in 1305. At this point, a new claimant to the Scottish crown emerged: Robert the Bruce. Bruce's family was actually of English origin. His ancestors were Norman barons invited north by the Scottish king to serve as retainers at court and to help train the military. His claim was not supported by everybody. Another man, John Comyn, also claimed the throne. The two rivals settled upon a meeting place, the Abbey Church in Dumfries, to settle their differences and compromise to form a united front against Longshanks. Bruce offered Comyn all of his lands if he would just swear allegiance to him as King of Scotland. Unfortunately, they started arguing about this, and during the argument, Robert the Bruce stabbed him. Bruce ran out of the church and started talking with his friend and ally, Roger de Kirkpatrick. Kirkpatrick asked Bruce how the meeting went, and Bruce replied by saying something to the effect of, "Not very well, I stabbed him." At which point Kirkpatrick said, "Is he dead?" And Bruce responded, "I don't know." So Kirkpatrick said to Bruce, "I'll make sure," and went in and finished the job. The Kirkpatrick coat of arms to this day features the words, "I'll make sure," to emphasize both their loyalty to Bruce and their determination. Bruce would go on to defeat Longshanks' son, Edward II, at the Battle of Bannockburn in 1314, and would govern as king of an independent Scotland. Union with England would not happen for another couple centuries. English conquest had failed for now.